over Trump at this point of the year. Harris is not in that position right now, where depending upon the national polls, you're going to see something like a Trump +3 or Trump +2, Harris +2, +4. It's a fairly dead even race right now.
All you timeless children with your predictions and flashbacks, trying to get ahead. What makes you think I can see you? What makes you think I believe you? Dreams inside my bed. Have you heard me lately? We were stepping up lately, shot from the past. All the dreams were flying, all the thoughts were dying. Heard something fast.
Presidential nominee Vice President Kamala Harris is expected to speak this evening if everything goes well. It's been a day of celebrating the nominee, yet the betting markets and the polls aren't necessarily reflecting it. Dylan, this past week in politics, of course, has been focused on the DNC. We've also heard some really interesting policy proposals come out from the candidates with respect to addressing inflation. Donald Trump's plan is to, of course, tell his cabinet members to figure out how to bring prices down, and Kamala's is to stop price gouging. In any event, these betting market odds are narrowing once again. Predicted tells us that Kamala, while potentially having a 53 or 54% chance of becoming president, that is something that may soon disappear. So, Mr. Radigan, this past week in politics, the DNC, do you think that it's becoming an effective vehicle to convince the American people that they need to vote for her for president, or is this race about to tighten up over the next few weeks?
I mean, my opinion is that the less she does, the better off she is. It's an interesting thing where, again, I think that with all these political candidates, you certainly had it with Biden, you definitely have it with Trump, and I think it's also true with Harris, which is the more people view the candidate through the symbol of their imagination or what they sort of want to project onto them, the more they like them. And the more the candidates actually say things or appear or offer any content of any kind, the less liked they are. And so because Harris has the benefit of being a symbol for A, the next generation, B, minorities and women, and C, not Trump, anything but Trump dynamic. The only thing she has going against her is if she says things that people don't like or exhibits behavior in public that people don't like. And so the less she says and does, I think the better off she is. I do think that her convention speech tonight will probably be very good. The two biggest critiques of Harris as a candidate, or as a speaker, I should say, is one, she laughs uncontrollably all the time for no apparent reason. And two, she talks to the crowd or the audience as if they're slow-minded 3-year-olds. And I do think that her coaches are aware that these are her two problems, that she talks to the world like they're 3 years old and that she laughs for no apparent reason at things that aren't funny. And I do think that her speaking has improved somewhat since she's become the presidential candidate. And I think you'll see her probably a well above average tonight because the stakes are so high. So if she does a good job tonight and then disappears, I think she'll get a nice touch of momentum that at least will keep her in the position she's in here through Labor Day. Now, the most interesting thing that I see in terms of the betting, just on the screen that's up in front of us, is that Biden to resign during his first term at 16 cents. That to me is the most attractive thing to sell. I just think that the only way Biden goes at this point is if he was to die in office. And I think there's less than a 16% chance that happens.
It would seem that, yes, I would agree with you there. I don't know if this is free money. They're selling, dollars for 83 cents here, right? Because if you were to buy no, or 84 cents if you were to buy no, and it settles at $1, then you make 16 cents in it, which isn't a bad rate of return, considering that you have about 5 months until Inauguration Day. That's a good annualized rate, as it were. But this is perhaps one of those pieces of misinformation that you're seeing in betting markets recently, where there are some individuals out there hyping the idea that he's going to pass the torch to Kamala, so she has the incumbency now. If that was going to happen, Dylan, that would have happened when he decided no longer to be the nominee.
Exactly.
There's
or
no
it
benefit.
would have happened before tonight, before her big speech, for sure.
Exactly. There's no incentive, and more importantly, the transition from, not that this is a perfect corollary, but I will admit that I've been sucked into rewatching Veep on HBO in recent weeks because the Selena Meyer campaign and how she becomes the presidential nominee has a lot of parallels to what happened with the Harris campaign and how she becomes the nominee. And it's also quite a funny show. Who doesn't like Julie Louis-Dreyfus? In any event, it doesn't make sense for her to be burdened by the transition to becoming president now that we're moving into the period when campaigning really begins. For all the knots that we twist ourselves into about polling pre-Labor Day, polling after Labor Day is really what matters the most. Which, Dylan, I mean, if we think about how this calendar is set up, the data shows us it's about 2 weeks after a convention when the polls reflect that good feeling bump that a convention typically provides. And so we have now an interesting little run here as we make our way towards Labor Day over the next few weeks where the polls could begin to reflect that good feelingness, and Kamala's odds in the betting markets begin to rise for no other reason than what we typically see. Dylan, is there a ceiling if we think about how much time there's left to Election Day? Right now, the market's pricing Kamala as the next president of the United States at 53 cents, basically 53%. If that got up to, say, 55 or 60, would that be too much juice squeezed out of the trade already? And would you think about, if you were trading it on the long side, would you think about trimming some of that position?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I've already had that thought. And I think that, I've already been thinking in that way, I should say. And I think there's also a space where Trump becomes, I guess on this screen, he's running 50 cents, but I've seen charts where he's running I think Trump below 46 is a buy, and I think Harris above 54 is a sell. I think that Trump will have, everything has been going Harris's way basically the last month.
Yes.
But I think that is unlikely to continue unabated, just, as a historical reference. And I think that there is likely to be some tightening on the spread between these two after Labor Day.
One of the corollaries that you could bring in here is how the polls compare to where we were, say, in 2016 or 2020. In 2016 and in 2020, Clinton and Biden both had sizable leads over Trump at this point of the year. Harris is not in that position right now, where depending upon the national polls, you're going to see something like a Trump +3 or Trump +2, Harris +2, +4. It's a fairly dead even race right now. It's so dead even that some of the more favorable outcomes for this are to see a 270 to 268 electoral vote split in either direction. Trump could win by 2, Kamala could win by 2. And so I'm very much with you that if you see either candidate really get too high in the short term, and right now the trajectory would be for Kamala to get too high in the short term, given how the structure exists in this market, would almost to be a fade because it's not great value there henceforth. So polling probably peaks within the next 2 weeks. Labor Day, of course, is not this coming Monday, but the Monday after. And by the time, for those avid financial market traders out there as well, by the time we get to the non-farm payrolls report that first week of September, that's when perhaps some of these polls begin to crest. Dylan,
this also, I don't know how legitimate this is, but the Harris market looks like a very lousy market. I would have thought there'd be a tighter spread there. How's it a penny wide on Trump and 7 cents wide on Harris? Is that what's going on with that? That's a different discussion, but
that is a different discussion. But you mentioned something in particular, though, and I think this is perhaps one of the opportunities that may be out there, depending upon the pricing that you can get. There are points, obviously, over the course of the day where these spreads, they ebb and they flow, depending on how much market liquidity there is. But depending upon what venue you're using, ours, of course, is predicted. But if you're in somewhere else, like a Poly Market or a Bovada or a Betfair, you'll notice that the odds are actually different across the board. So if you have the ability and the access to some of these other betting platforms, and you could do so in a legal manner, then there may be arbitrage opportunities. The problem is, Dylan, as you just pointed out, and this is where I was going to go with this next, when you look to some of these markets, depending upon the time of day or the contract that you want to trade in, 7 cents wide here is
catastrophic.
We'd like to see something tighter. So the point being, if we are moving to try to place a trade to close this spread, to arb out the opportunities across different platforms, be mindful of the difference between the bid and the ask, the best offer on either end. That way, you're not just creating paper profits. You're actually doing something that can put a little bit of money in your pocket. Which, for those of us out there that look at this stuff, it's, Poly Market is nice, but it's not available for you as citizens. And so what's fascinating to look at, tradable wise, you have to go through certain loopholes or be out of the country in order to even access it, as it were. Dylan, I think what perhaps is the better question here is what's going to happen in Congress. There's only 2 markets on the board right now for Poly Market, so we can forget a second about who's going to win the Arizona Senate or the Ohio Senate race. That's not really the point I'm getting to. But a few weeks ago when Biden was the nominee, the results look catastrophic for Democrats.
Catastrophic.
Not only were they going to lose the presidency, but the Senate was out the window. The House was out the window as well. A Republican trifecta looked near guaranteed. From your read of the land, from your myriad experience in politics, financial markets, journalism, what feeling do you get out there when you talk to people, both personally and professionally? Do you feel like the base case scenario for the general public now is that this is going to be more competitive down ballot as well? Or is this still a wipeout?
1,000%. I mean, the race it's less about who Harris is as an individual candidate and more about what she is a symbol of. And because her symbol, which is next generation, women, minority, all these things that weren't a factor in the race a month ago, makes her much more powerful, particularly in the context of having a doddering old man as an opponent. I mean, before you had two doddering old men that that 5 out of 6 people hated.
The double haters, yes.
And in the scheme of the two doddering old men, one of them, Biden, was perceived to be more doddering than the other. But that's not because people don't perceive Trump to be a doddering old man. For sure they do, and for sure he is. And so the contrast Trump-Biden is, well, they're two doddering old men, but Biden's more doddering, as opposed to now the contrast is we got rid of one of the doddering old men, but we still stuck with the other one. And now our alternative is one of these doddering old men that 5 out of 6 people hate, a new generational candidate that is not terribly popular historically, never got a vote. I mean, there's 1,000 problems with Harris, but the fact is she still doesn't inspire the level of clear animosity. And for that reason, I believe Harris is greatly beneficial to the down ballot races because she creates a more enthusiasm and more engagement, higher voter turnout, and also activates more conscious remembrance, awareness, thought, however you want to interpret it, around the abortion issue, which no one is in favor of abortion, but the majority of people are also not in favor of making abortion illegal. And so there's a difference between whether people believe abortion should be legal or illegal. That is a different discussion about whether people believe that abortion is good, should be common, because I don't think anybody thinks it's good or should be common, but that doesn't mean that that people want it to be illegal. And I think that Harris's presence in the race as an icon of women among other icons that she wears or talisman that she wears brings up that issue, and that issue also then trickles down ballot.
It's almost a Bill Clinton type of mantra, like safe, rare, and legal. And if Democrats can needle their way through that messaging, then it resonates enough.
My point is Harris is...
Oh, absolutely.
She's symbolic. She doesn't even have to say it. Her mere existence, I'm more aware, everybody's more aware of women's issues, and there's no more central woman's issue than the abortion issue right now because of the changes in policy that were made by the Supreme Court over the last few years and the state governments. Having two doddering old men, you kind of forget, it becomes unless it's some central organizing issue for you, then outside of that core constituency, it's not really a relevant issue. But when you have a younger female candidate who's one of the two choices, it surfaces and brings back memories of that issue, which I think is very beneficial to the down ballot Democrats, especially those who skew more moderate economic and border issues, but hold on to the sort of traditional liberal values on abortion, as you just described it, which is safe, rare, and legal.
It sets up a fascinating dynamic because, as we've seen in the country over recent years, in the wake of Dobbs, a number of states have put this issue on their ballots for referendum. And it doesn't matter if it's Kansas or somewhere in deep blue on the coasts. But the fact is that large majorities of the population are passing these referendums saying we want to make sure this axis is preserved. So it doesn't matter if it's left or right. Democrats have been able to mobilize their base around this, and that's a very potent reason why Kamala may be the better, avatar to bring this forward. Two old men argue about it.
I think that the congressional race is she's much better for the down ballot than Biden was for that reason.
We talk about the down ballot impact of her coming onto the ticket, and if we were to go back to predicted and start thinking about what does a race look like, how many electoral seats can be won, some of these longer dated contracts, now that the vice president is off the board, for example, you would almost have to operate from a place where you think that this is going to work out a little bit more favorably for Democrats, perhaps in the Senate and in the House, right? We're both in that place right now. The question is, moving forward, what are the good odds and where's the value on the board? Because, for example, buying, Josh Shapiro a few weeks ago when he was trading at 10 cents was great, but buying him at 70 cents wasn't a good idea. Same thing with Tim Walz, right? Buying him at any point was actually a good idea because he became the vice president. But Mark Kelly had his ups and downs. So the timing and the value here is what matters most. Dylan, I think that the one that you pointed to at the start of the show perhaps is...
That's the easiest mark on that board, for sure.
This perhaps, I think, is the easiest mark on the board. For Biden to resign, he would have to effectively try to be avoiding impeachment, which, to illuminate some of the news flow on this recently, the House Judiciary Committee recently concluded an investigation. Jim Jordan, the Oversight Committee, oversaw this as well. Jim Jordan opined that Biden perhaps did a number of things that were impeachment worthy. And yet the conclusion is that they're not going to do anything with these articles of impeachment, not even bring them to a vote on the House floor to force the Senate to go through a trial, because Biden's a lame duck president. But what's the point? All you're going to do is take attention off of the election cycle. You're not going to give Trump any breathing room. So you don't want the spotlight on DC talking about Biden. You want the spotlight on Trump. So Republicans aren't going to go through with this impeachment inquiry any further than it's gone. So will Biden resign? I mean, no, that he doesn't face a serious health issue that we're aware of. If he were to do so for strategic reasons, it would have happened back on July 21st. He would not be handing the keys of the kingdom over to Kamala after the DNC, forcing her then to spend several weeks learning the ins and outs of the Oval, the joint SOC meetings, meeting with all the various cabinet secretaries, foreign visits, not happening. So Dylan, you and me are both in the same place. This is perhaps the best value on the board right now. Will Joe Biden resign in his first term? I will be taking the no side of that market, sir. That is a silly suggestion as the facts on the field stand from my point of view.
And 16 cents is real money.
It's, if we can turn, we're talking about what, 8 over 48, 33%, right? If we can go from a 33% rate of return on invested capital, it's not terrible. It's great, annualized over time. Those are the things that you should be looking at. 16 cents, putting down 84. We want those kind of trades every day of the week. And will this be resolved immediately? No. This is a longer duration trade. Like the vice presidential market was what? That was a short duration trade. For those options traders out there, it's like trading the weeklies or the 0Ds. There's a lot of convexity there. When we hear that Shapiro's not going to be the nominee, his contract goes from 70 cents down to zero. Walz goes up from 50 cents to 100 almost immediately. We're not going to know if Biden resigns during his first term until his first term is officially over. And that's not until January. So this is a market where if it gets really too high, if this is trading at 20 or 30 cents ever, that's an absolute buy no, as far as I'm concerned, unless the context there is that there is something more nefarious going on, which we're not aware of right now.
But let's go back to the screen. I mean, I'm trying to think if there, because I was actually hopeful that Harris was going to see that 55-45 for Harris 47th president, which is very different than the one you're saying the president where she's 54-47, and that other chart was very different. I just wonder if that 55 is a.
We've actually received inquiries about this, and people have reached out to me as to why this may be the case. There is the possibility that Biden doesn't resign, of course, but he would have pass away in office, which if that were to be the case, because Biden's the 46th president, Harris would be then the 47th president. But just because she's the 47th president doesn't mean that she's guaranteed to get elected in the fall.
I see.
And so this could resolve it yes, and these both could resolve it no. So it's not necessarily a perfect arbitrage opportunity.
So basically that's the odds of a resignation or death before the election is the additional juice or the additional the elevated price on that screen or that cube.
That's exactly how I'm viewing it. This is the resignation / passing away premium that's built into the market here. And we would expect these as we get closer to election day, right? We would expect these to narrow. I don't think you're ever going to get rid of this spread because this could be true. She could lose the election and Biden could pass away on New Year's, right? If he dies on Christmas Eve, Harris has lost the election, but then she becomes 47th president to serve out the remaining 3 or 4 weeks of the term.
So you're saying that's why that 53-47 in the cube to the right of the Harris 47th.
Yes.
The Harris, if you have Harris 47, 55-45, then you have woman at 53-47. And you're saying that the difference between, because I was wondering if the difference between those two is some sort of bizarre Nikki Haley component on the other side of the ledger.
You bring that up, and that is also a possibility because she is trading at 2 cents. that she will win the presidential election. I don't know how her odds have doubled over the past day from 1 cent to 2 cents coming out of Trump. But again, the spread here, right? Not a I mean, we could buy no here and hope to make a penny. But if we're wrong, we're really wrong. Obviously, for Haley to become the nominee at this point in time would be very difficult. J.D. Vance is on the ticket. As we've seen from the Democrat side of things, if J.D. Vance were to get off or Trump were to get off the ticket, not that I think this is going to happen, but just gaming it out, right? The way the campaign finance laws work is that Vance would have to remain on the ticket for all of the money to stay within that campaign finance vehicle. And so then Vance would probably become the presidential nominee, and there would be a process to replace the vice presidential slot then, just like it happened with the Democrats, in which case Haley still wouldn't win the election. So if you want to risk 99 to make one, I'm sure that could tickle your fancy. For me, I will not be making a trade of that regard.
It's hard to get there.
Just not good risk to reward, right?
Yeah.
Incrementally, would I rather say Biden will not resign?
Is there a market for Vance to get tossed in some way because he's a lunatic? That's something that's also occurred to me as a short Vance tag of some kind. I don't know if that is even getting traded. Like the odds that Vance stays the vice presidential nominee.
Not on Predicted. On other markets, even those that are potentially based overseas, like Polymarket, for example, again, not legal for U.S. citizens, there are certainly way more depth because anyone can create a market, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you go over there, you can get odds for those various type of outcomes. But as it pertains to here,
and so then so when you look at the top right, at least as I'm looking at the screens, which party wins the presidency? Democrats 54-49, Harris 47th president 55-45. 2024 presidential election winner, Harris Trump 53-49. Is the fact that those prices are not identical is a function of, I understand the resignation passing away premium on Harris, but I do still wonder between, let's say, 2024 presidential election winner, Harris Trump versus Democrats Republicans, is that just the spreads? Is that just an inefficiency of the spreads in that price, or is that actually a variance?
That's just basically due to the spreads right now. 55-46 fat spreads here on Democrats winning.
Okay.
And then you see it here again, 7 cents spread right now. Time of the day, things ebb and flow over the course of the day. Liquidity comes in and out of the market. Ultimately, you do see what I find very fascinating about all this is that these type of betting markets typically attract people that are obviously interested in finance, that are interested in politics, that are interested in probability. And so that skews towards men. It skews towards men between the ages of 20 to 50. And demographically, that skews a little bit more Republican. And so when you look at some of these betting markets, for example, it's almost as if people are betting on the presidential election or doing it through the yes or no on Trump and less so on the yes or no on Harris, which is another one of those little insights. If you're trying to trade these betting markets right now, the liquidity on Trump is a little bit better than the liquidity on Harris. So if I wanted to say buy yes on Harris becoming president, I would rather just buy no on Trump becoming president.